for that. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority Board of Directors meeting. We're here in lovely Ypsilanti at the Riverside Arts Center. It is Thursday, May 16th. We're early this year, and we have a quorum. First on our agenda is to approve the agenda. I would like to make a request to move the YTC updates, which is 3.1, down to 8.4, and then make the CEO report and ZEB updates 8.5. Is there any discussion on that, or would someone like to make a motion to approve that change?
So moved, Rich.
Okay, moved by Rich, seconded by Simi. All those in favor say raise your hands. Perfect, that passed unanimously, and then now it's up to approve the agenda as amended. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Susan, and seconded by Mike. All those in favor, raise your hands. Thank you, that passed unanimously. Wonderful. First up on our agenda actually is public comment. And I see that we have people in the gallery. Deb, do we have anyone online as well?
We do not.
Okay.
This moment.
And how many people do we have signed up? I can't see behind me. Just like, okay. Anyone wishing to make a public comment, please feel free to step up to the podium. And you have a maximum of 3 minutes, and please share your name for the record.
Good afternoon. Different meeting setting where I'm used to compared to Ann Arbor. Long time no see to board staff and as a public. Those of you that don't know me, my name is Robert Bosky. I'm a longtime transit activist, and I'm also the vice chair for the Citizen Advisory Committee with the Regional Transit Authority. Today, I want to give my comments really geared to some of the YTC updates that'll be under the operational updates. Just want to give some credit out to all the staff, planning and engagement, but also the promotion and marketing department for all the amazing output that they put for their Ypsilanti Transit Center. First off, I want to give a big shout out to John Luke and his team, especially Forrest, for all the amazing work they're doing, especially Gretchen for her attendance and helping with that. What we've honestly looked for is just a brand new transit center. This has passed recently. We actually had a brand new transit center open up in Northwest Detroit. The new Jason Hargrove Transit Center that will serve DDOT and smart routes for years to come. And also looking at using and preserving history, keeping it sustainable as well. With the Ypsilanti, in the case here, and all the money that we've been allocated from Congressman Debbie Dingle and all of our local and state elected officials, it's a huge milestone. With all the plans that were proposed, I went to a couple of public hearings, and I want to give a big shout out to Madam Chair for her engagement in this Ypsilanti Transit Center process and just showing the stress that we need something that's viable for the city and residents here in Ypsilanti. Option number 4, I'm looking at some of the public hearing notes that we have here through the virtual open house and the plans that we had on option 1A, 1B, and then 9 and 10. Just the amount of planning that went in, especially option 4, just taking that whole parking lot and reconstructing it into a full-blown transit center is just going to be absolutely amazing. Looking at retail, looking at other routes to come in, maybe potential expansions. You know, when we build off this, we can actually build off on extra other initiatives for transit, especially connections in other areas. So I just want to give a big thank you to all the TheRide staff, especially marketing, the outreach team for just amazing stuff, including planning to be able to pull this off and get more people engaged. A lot of positive responses. I know the kids were going crazy over the stairs. So thank you again. It's just wonderful where we're seeing this go and growing Ypsilanti for institution. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Devin, that time, did anybody pop up on, yeah, no, then that we close public comments for this portion, and we're on to general announcements. I have one general announcement. I want to congratulate Monica Ross Williams on her reappointment to the Ypsilanti Township position with us. And I don't have anything else, but are there others that have any communications? Nope. All right, seeing none, and we're going to go right on to the consent agenda. If everyone had a chance to read it, if there aren't any questions, would somebody like to move the agenda into the record? That would be Julie Graham, seconded by Rich. All those in favor, raise your hands. And that passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. We're just moving along like crazy here. Next on our agenda is the Open Dialogue Task Force update, and that's Mr. Rich Chang.
Yep, thank you. So first off, I want to thank you again for making the trip up to Ann Arbor at our last board meeting and for diving into the recent phone survey. We were planning on actually holding a Open Dialogue Task Force meeting after that to discuss some of the topics, potential approaches that we can have to that, but we had to reschedule. So we're hoping to have that set in the next few weeks. Except one schedule that we're just waiting on and that firmed up. There was an event recently that you would have put on their 2034, 2050 plan. And Susan and I actually just got invited to, I don't think any specific, to be there. And it was a really well thought out overall presentation plan. Some good information for us to get involved in discussing some things. There is a second request that I actually have for the board in that part of the ODTS role and mission, right, is to outreach and then also to really look at the way we have policies set up, to see whether there's any modifications, changes, in particular regarding our legal and law owners. And as part of this whole policy governance journey we've all been on, there are certain policies. And there's an article that was handed out that's called Abstracting Up, which I happened to read, and I think it's really well, and Kathleen actually sent that out to the entire board. I think it's a very well written, fairly short, kind of like news article that I found extremely useful for really finding a lot of concern on different things I know I've heard me and others bring up regarding that. When we're doing these buying reports, what is the actual core issue that we're trying to figure out instead of being really specific about certain items? So that's why they call it abstracting up. I think it would be helpful if the board can take a look at that and give a discussion. Some beyond that, Susan.
Well, just again, we did have this chance to get a short presentation on the University 2050 plan. There's a substantive amount dealing with transit. And I just shared very briefly with Matt just before this meeting. I would strongly urge us as a board that we organize with the help of the university a presentation on the transit related pieces. Their goal is to connect all 5 campuses in Ann Arbor. Their challenge is, of course, that involves the right of way. Their challenge is also there's a lot of people and not a lot of road width. So they're looking at a series of things that I think touch on our own projects. For instance, they're looking at BRT. They're looking at transit priority streets, and that's something we've talked about. They're looking at new transit centers. They're looking at an elevated automated tramway, which is a really interesting new technology. So just the bite-sized pieces that we heard, that would very much interconnect with the work we did with the long-range plan that we put out to the community. And I think it would behoove us to understand what the university is doing, is planning, is hoping for, including partnership with us. A good example would be high occupancy lanes where transit is prioritized, something we've talked about, and how we advocate together for the right of way to benefit our riders. So I'm asking as a group, if we could maybe bring to policy, to the governance committee, maybe a question, could we have this as an educational subject in the near term? The other thing we've heard, which I also thought was interesting, were questions around policy and what we as a board could play more of a role in. And a good example is questions around, for instance, the 23 expansion was raised as, did the board have a robust discussion and how did we weigh in on it? And it was like, well, that's an interesting question. Should we, as a board, be weighing in on those things? So we didn't have much more than just the question raised, but I'd like to raise it for us as a board to possibly, again, bring forward to governance. Is this an area that we want to spend some time on as a board? Is this the role of policy making? So those 2 points of contact with the university were very interesting. And I, for one, would love to know more. Most importantly, if we get a chance to know that 2050 plan a little deeper, I think it helps us as we try to make good decisions for our agency and our public.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, so I mean, that was something I really enjoyed coming out of those meetings, actually, caused us, one, to have more visibility into a partner, pretty big partner of our organization. And the other is, I think we're all just trying to throw it at minds, be it board members or staff, and so I think this will be a really good session.
Just as a quick temperature check then in terms of what was just presented or communicated about the 20. Show of hands, how many would be extremely interested in education? Figure out how to make that.
I've got a question.
Yes.
Matt, if you coordinate with them on what they're doing in these areas,
Oh, yes, on a regular basis.
they reach out to you.
Yes, we have sort of ongoing continual conversations. But we also respect, their plan is their plan. They are briefing us and frankly, the rest of the community on their intent. They're asking all of us for our thoughts and feedback, but their decisions are their own. But I think we've got a lot of things that has been said mutually beneficial between us and them that are absolutely worth coordination. We do that, and I think it's a great idea to have them perhaps come by, brief you, and if it's okay, maybe our staff can talk a little bit about the work we're doing, sort of coordinate with as part of that discussion.
Oh, yeah, one update is Sugat is leading up the 2050 campus plan, their big 5 campus thing, and she was a prior.
Are there any other communications or announcements? Hearing none, all that was ownership. Wait, Rich, you were gonna start on ownership dialogue. Did you finish everything you wanted to say about that? Okay, great. We diverted and my brain diverted. That takes us all the way down to operational updates. The first is 8.1, the business plan introduction, and that's Mr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Dina and I are here today to give you, the board, some process updates as we begin our annual budget process. It is that time of year. I know it feels like we just did it, but that's because we did, because it happened every year. So we don't have, details or presentations. Today is purely about reminders, warm up on the processes themselves. So happy to have discussion or clarifications about any of that. The process that we're using this year is the same as we have used over several previous years. Next month, it's my intent to present to you our corporate business plan. This is our big picture, multi-year corporate work plan, many initiatives, all of the big projects, the direct connections with your strategic goals and your policies are very clear in there. And this is the thing that drives a good chunk of the budget, but we don't put any dollar figures in it at this stage. It's still sort of a conceptual conversation. The dollar figures will come later. Once the business plan is sort of firmed up, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, we use that, Dina uses that kind of as the seed to drive the budget itself. As she's going to say, I'm sure in a few moments, she's already started developing the budget. It's a big thing. It takes months to do. There is naturally a little overlap, but she's doing sort of her preliminary startup stuff on that. So this is still very much the business plan will drive the budget. And then finally, you as a board will have the opportunity to vote on it. September 19th is our board meeting. Our fiscal year begins October 1 with the federal calendar. So it is the September board meeting traditionally where you vote to approve a budget, and we do need it in September so that we can make paychecks October 1. So very quickly to step back, and we talked a bit about this last year. a reminder that we run a hybrid budget process. It's part policy governance, part direct board approval, and we have some new faces on the board, some new faces on staff. And so I thought it might be a good time to revisit very briefly some of those reminders that we talked about last year. So when the board adopted policy governance, you began giving your priorities to us through your written policies very early on. So we know when we begin developing the recommended budgets, what your priorities are. You gave them to us in your ends policies. We know your expectations on how the budget is to be developed and the operational considerations that are to be there. Those are your executive limitations, your parameters. It's actually those things that really sort of create the budget process that we use. So staff use that, your collective direction to us through those policies to bring you a comprehensive recommended budget. It's comprehensive in that it's operating and it's capital, and it sort of covers all revenue streams that we use. And then we have, I think, about 4 months of discussion, starting at the big picture and then drilling down into as much detail as we need to, and then your decision in September. A couple of key points to remind us. The process really geared towards transparency. So we start with the big picture. The business plan you're going to see, there's a lot there. It's going to be right up front. It has all of the long range plan, core issues that are there. It has much more on the internal operational means this year than we have done in previous years. So you're going to see pop the hood, be able to see a whole lot more of that sort of stuff. But it's really intended to make sure that we hear both your collective direction as a board and your individual questions and concerns. Because we are a blend of policy governance and direct board approval, it does create a balancing act that we need to strike every year. It's not for the staff, it's for you. We understand that your collective directions, the rules we're supposed to follow, are in your policies, and that's what Dina and I use to build the business plan and the budget. But then you also vote to approve the budget, and you vote as individuals to approve the budget, much like any board or city council generally does. That always sort of creates a bit of a tension of, are we following the collective expectations, or are we looking to individual needs as we go into this budget process? So we always come in with the first, but we need to make sure that we provide space to have discussions about the latter. So the business plan really is, and I've described it to you in the past as a bridge. It is an attempt to bring to you sort of off the hood, see the big picture things that we're working on, the priorities, what we expect to come in year 1 versus year 5 or year 20. And so that we can have a conversation about that, frankly, early in the process, while there's still a lot of time, if we need to, for Dina to adjust something in the budget. We're trying to create a budget process that sort of flows smoothly from big picture to smaller issues. And we are trying to avoid, frankly, the stress and tension that can sometimes come with budget discussions, the late nights, especially if we get to September and we discover belatedly that we may not have enough votes to pass the budget. That's not a good thing. Doing things like that on the fly is not preferred. So as we bring the business plan to you, I'm going to really encourage you guys, let's hear your questions. We really want to, big, small, whatever they are. I'm committed to doing an even better job this year than we did last year. We did get some great questions last year. We also missed a few. We're going to make sure that that doesn't happen again this year, that we're sort of collecting everything and responding to it. But at the end of the day, we'll develop a recommended budget based on the collective expectations you've given us, our best professional advice about which projects and expenses should be advanced to meet those expectations. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the board has control of this process through your written policies and your votes on the budget. So rest assured that that's sort of how the process has run very successfully now, I think since 2019, 2018. It's been successful. We get a little better at it every year. So that's the high level. Before I turn it over to Dina or your questions, the business plan, as I mentioned, we're working on the draft right now. It's similar to what you've seen in the past, same sort of general structure, thematic buckets are actually the same. But we are trying to make it, frankly, more digestible, easier to understand, much longer, more detailed list of initiatives, projects, timelines, or the operating projects or the capital projects. We're working up some new Gantt charts that we hope will make it much easier for you to quickly see where the project you're concerned about is, where it falls on the timeline, when is it getting done. The whole intent of that project, again, of the business plan really is transparency for you, for members of the public, to sort of see the whole smorgasbord of everything that's being recommended and how it plays out. I will mention that the business plan covers decades. Because as an infrastructure agency, some of the things we're working on will take decades to deliver. So we have to think that far out. The budget that Dina will be presenting to you several months from now is a one-year budget. Because that's just annually how we do our budgets. But the multi-year business plan provides a lot of context for that one-year budget, and you can see how the first year is just the implementation of a much bigger vision. So with that, I look forward to bringing you the business plan next month. Look forward to beginning the conversation about that. I expect that conversation to go on for a couple of meetings. At the same time, Dina's going to start spinning up more and more detailed budget information and bringing it to you. One last thing, and then I'll be quiet. A couple of us attended the city of Ann Arbor's first, Milton Tahoney, their city administrator, presented his first crack at their budget to city council, his introduction, because they're on a different calendar and their budget gets done sort of in the summer. So he's ahead of us. And I was relieved to see he actually also presents a very high level conceptual sort of budget now to city council at the beginning, which is very similar to what we do. So I feel like we're a good company in that regard. So Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions about that broader process or the business plan before we turn it over to Dina for the budget.
Thank you, Matt. Do you have any questions? That's good. Yes, go ahead, Mike.
Matt, I recall that last year we didn't get the business plan in the board package. We got it later, and therefore didn't have as much time to digest it. And actually, I went back and looked, and that my memory remarkably is correct. Will you be able to get it in the board package so that we can have a like a correct to really go through it? Because like you said, it's a really important document.
It is. First of all, my sincere hope is not only to do that, but maybe get it to you in advance of that packet. And also in the packet, in so much of the packet is a public document. And also just to allay any concerns, we expect to discuss that over several meetings. Yeah. So that's not a one and done sort of thing. And the first draft that we give you for next month will probably be followed by draft 2 and draft 3. So even if we can't solicit every point of feedback or you don't have enough time in June, we're more than happy to continue the conversation in July.
So last year with the business plan, I was disappointed because I asked questions and I never got answers. The same problem happened with the budget. So just to be blunt, it's very disappointing to weigh in when I don't get the response. The other problem is sometimes I hear, well, we wove it back into the document. You just didn't see where we did it. So a request is, can we work with you to establish what that process would look like? So if a question's asked, we would get a response when the board packet goes out ahead of the meeting, and every question gets answered, not just some, because it's a frustration, that hybrid that you described. It's like, why am I even participating if I don't know where my role is in this? Because I'm not getting feedback. And I totally appreciate how much staff is juggling. This budget process is very heavy lifting. So it's not anything to do with criticism about staff, more the process didn't work. So if I'll leave it maybe for this next meeting, if you and the staff could discuss how you will respond to all questions and how all board member, feedback is at least some point addressed, even if it's not, substantive. Sometimes those are the things that help us to build our understanding. Because what I learned along the way was this business plan is a staff document. It's not a board document. So
Correct.
weighing in, a good example, I was trying to understand where the marketing expenditures were going to show themselves. And I never did understand. All I saw was we'll have a robust marketing plan. And then I just never saw the substance below it.
Hmm.
So if somewhere along the way, if staff could sort of work to help us figure out that process, that would help me, I think, be a better board member participant.
I completely agree. Just so everyone understands, we had a sort of a formatting thing. Susan solicited or provided a lot of really good comments in a format that we weren't used to, and we just didn't see them during a PDF until frankly too late in the process. So Dina and I have discussed exactly how we're going to do this better. And I think it involves making sure we communicate back to you individually and say, okay, are these the questions? Did we catch them all? Make sure they're not like somewhere else that we didn't see initially. So that, and then absolutely your request for sort of a direct response, I think is very reasonable. We'll endeavor to do that as best as we can.
I really appreciate it. Yeah, this is no criticism on staff. I'm one voice in the middle of a very big process. The budget is a lot of details. And I appreciate how much is going on. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments for that? All right, seeing none, we're going to head up to the budget process. And that's Ms. Geary. Thank you.
Thank you. So in your packet, you have the FY 2025 budget process timeline. What this timeline is really indicating here is like a high level look at how the process works. And I'm going to share some comments to just kind of kick things off, and I'll be sharing more detail next month and every month thereafter until the budget gets approved in committees as well as at board meetings. So just to introduce the budget in general will be aligned with the board's ends. It will be, which is also aligned with the business plan. The business plan aligns with board ends, and then the budget will align with that as well, and specifically board ends. It will comply with regulatory requirements. It will include an operations budget and a capital budget. It will be provided in context of the current budget as well as new assumptions or current assumptions that are emerging through this year, in addition to projections. So we'll be talking a lot about how things are going this year, and that will lead into what we assume for 2025. So that's just a high level of what we look for in the budget process. On the next page, on page 46 of your packet, is an actual timeline. And the timeline just provides, like I mentioned, the overview of the process. The process includes engagement with staff, the public, and the board. Right now, as Matt said, we've already started working on the budget, and what we're doing now is looking at where we're at this fiscal year, any new emerging items that could impact our budget for next year, and making initial assumptions about what it will cost to what we call maintain our current service levels, or the service levels that we've already committed to, that will be in place for fiscal year 2025. As we work through the budget process, we'll incorporate other things like initiatives that tie directly to the business plan. So in terms of looking at the timeline specifically, I color coded it so we could kind of see the different levels of involvement and as we go through the process in different stages. It's very similar to last year and the year before, for those of you who have been on the board before. The salmon color is pretty much where we engage with staff, and you can see there's a lot more development in the beginning with staff. And then we start to give previews to the board as early as June, and that's a little bit different than last year. Last year, some of the feedback we got from the board was that you wanted to see some of the assumptions and initial numbers as early as you could, and last year, I think it was July, so this year we're pushing it to June. So you'll start to see initial assumptions and some numbers, and I'll do a little presentation for the first time on the budget in June. And again, it will be current services. It won't include initiatives. I'll remind you of that next month when I'm presenting. I'll try and keep it fairly brief because they are initial projections and assumptions. And we do fine tune them throughout the summer. But I do want to make sure the board has an opportunity to see things a little bit earlier. And also Matt will be presenting the corporate business plan, which will probably be a pretty hefty presentation. So I'll probably keep the budget presentation a little shorter, but I will also be presenting it in committees before the board meeting in June. So it won't be your very first time seeing any information on the budget. Then as we move through June and into July, you can see we have public budget preview and public comment for the first time in July. Then we present more information, updated information in July. That's when we start to look at initiatives. Staff are putting together initiatives now, but there's another opportunity to review those initiatives in the context of the corporate business plan after the board has given their input. So we usually start to incorporate initiatives into the budget later in July, but before we present the budget in August. So you get an idea and you already know what kinds of things we're planning into the budget. In August, we'll continue to present in committee and again to the full board, more budget reviews, which will be moving into what's called the draft budget. This draft budget will be expected to be much closer to what we plan to present in September. Our goal would be to not make any major changes between August and September. If we don't have to, if something comes up and there's an emergent item, we would call that out and let you know. In August, we also are required by law to do an official public hearing, which is part of the board meeting in August. So that's why that August 15th present draft budget to the board is both yellow and blue, because there's a little bit of public comment opportunity there, which is the second public comment opportunity before we head into September for the official proposed budget. So then once we incorporate initiatives and we've had a chance to share them in committee, we'll be coming to the full board in September for approval. That board meeting is September 19th. So as Kathleen said, it seems a little earlier this year, and it is. We've moved some timelines around to try to accommodate. It just seems like this, the way they've landed this week, it's about a week earlier. So our timeline accommodates all of that, and we hope to present you a budget that you've had plenty of time to review and input on by the time we ask for approval on September 19th. So I'm happy to answer additional questions. I heard Susan's comments. Of course, we'll incorporate that into the discussion next month when we talk about starting the budget. And we usually touch on the timeline every single board meeting so we can orient ourselves where we are in the process and what's coming next.
It's open to the board. Any questions or comments?
I'll just make a quick comment that may be obvious to a lot of people, but next year's budget will be special because it will be the first year that we have a full year of revenue from the new village and the services that we have. So it's going to be really nice to see all of that in the budget. I think there'll be a lot more numbers.
It'll be bigger.
numbers.
It will be bigger. Yeah.
Any other?
I just had a general comment. Did you other people have questions or comments from the budget timeline? Sorry, it's been sort of related, but. Okay, so I had a mild heart attack. When I read this actual budget process time, because as we're going through policy governance, I'm starting to pay more attention to the words. And
Good to know.
the governance process, it's because it was truncated, but I was like, what? And it says, the board has direct responsibility to create, and then let's see approval of the annual budget developed and recommended to CEO. And I was like, wait a second, I don't think we're the ones creating the budget. And as I did that, I actually looked at the full 3.2 board job description policy that's in there. And I'd like to recommend that we actually apply for a change overall to that policy, because that part that says the board is responsibility to create. That word to create is actually a lot, especially in regards to a lot of the bullet points on there. The suggestion I have is actually just replace to create with the word for. Because then it actually flows in the gap better with all the sub bullets that we actually are responsible for, because we know. The way it reads right now is like, according to the board is direct responsibility to create, and then 3.2.7 is approval of the annual budget. We're not creating approval. So we're actually responsible for.
Not creating anything.
Yeah, that's true. That was just a general comment.
No, that was a really good catch, Rich. I mean, this was all in a 30-year-old federal government's.
Yeah.
We did certainly add it to the agenda, have a nice discussion about it. Management didn't know much about it. Really good. Is everybody else sort of in agreement, just not if it's. Sounds good. Excellent, Rich. Thank you so much. And I'm sure some of it too, probably what was written by Carver and how we changed and adapted. So this is a living document, so this is great. Are there any other questions or comments for Dina specifically on what was just presented? If not, we're going to go ahead and move on to 8.3, the fiscal year 24 quarterly two financial report. Again, this is Dina.
Thank you. Okay, so on page 47 of your packet is the issue brief and the beginning of the quarter 2 financial statement with highlights. I will start by just kind of talking about the financial statement page, which is on page 49. So the highlights really for this quarter, first of all, this was presented to the finance committee a couple weeks ago. So there was a detailed review of the financial statements with the finance committee prior to the board meeting. So from there, I'll share some highlights about what's going on in our income statement. It's pretty much good news all the way around. The revenues and expenses are both trending favorably this fiscal year as of halfway through the year. I will note that on the revenue side, there are some revenues that are trending a little bit high for us and or higher than what we budgeted. And we expect that trend to continue through the year. The expense trend is favorable, but we do expect that to flatten out. We expect to be pretty close to budget by the end of the year. So that favorable trend on expenses will probably flatten out as we're staffing up for the expansion of services to begin in August. So the budget is actually straight line and the expenses are a little bit lighter at the beginning of the year because we haven't fully staffed for the services that we just started in May in the budget. I mean, it's not showing that expense yet, but the expenses will start to hit. So expenses will kind of escalate at a little bit of a higher pace, and that was expected. So by the end of the year, there could be a small surplus. We'll watch it as we go, but we do expect expenses to be pretty much on target at this point. I also want to point out on the same page that we have used almost all of our pandemic relief funds for the fiscal, for good, all of them, many fiscal years. We have only 1 quarter left to use them. So before the end of the year, we will have fully exhausted all of our pandemic relief funds as we budgeted. So that was also planned. It's not new. I just wanted to point it out that we're executing on the budget plan. Moving on to the next page, page 50. I just want to hit a few highlights on the balance sheet side. So assets and liabilities are pretty much stable. No major swings there, which is what we typically like to see. Net position is improving just slightly, but nothing erratic, just a little bit favorable there. As far as our operating reserves, we are above our reserve target of 2.7. We're around 3. So our operating reserves are adequate to meet liquidity for what we need. There are no changes to the capital reserve because obviously we aren't using any of that right now. We've got plans to use it, as you all know, but we haven't needed to start the projects yet, so that money is still there. And all of our investments are stable as well. There was some movement in the investments, which is normal. There was one thing that I did highlight at the finance committee that was a little unique. We actually had a treasury note that was called early. So we had to reinvest that. The good news is it was a 5.5% investment for 1.8 million. I didn't actually realize it was callable, so I'm having a discussion with the bank to talk about some of the investments, but the good news is we were able to reinvest it at 4.86%. So not a huge difference, but it's a little bit lower. It's still consistent with what we've been investing in recently. So no major loss there. Just wanted to point it out because it was a different event and it is something we're discussing with the investment side of the thing. So we did have discussion about that at the finance committee and I wanted to highlight it for the board as well. That concludes my remarks and highlights on the report, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Move on to the board. Yes, yes.
But just, if you could touch on fares look like they're up. So does that mean ridership is up with the budget?
Actually, the fare revenue is up primarily because of our contracts. We had a change in the price, with the U of M contract. So there was a period of time where the U of M contract was, paying a different rate during the pandemic. Since we came out of the pandemic, they went back to the rate, the pre-pandemic rate, and the budget did not anticipate that. That happened mid-year, like halfway through, like just about a quarter of the way through this year. So we didn't adjust the budget for that, so that's why it's a little bit high. Ridership is good and fares are trending slightly above, but not to the extent that you're seeing here.
Oh, go ahead, just.
On the other side, the federal operating assistance. The 54, nearly 55% variance, what does that do to?
So the federal, if you remember, for federal operating assistance, we're trying not to use any of the 5307 funds for operating. However, to make sure we had a balanced budget for this fiscal year, knowing that we weren't going to get the money from the millage until mid-year, we were planning to potentially use some of that if we needed to start the millage services in advance of receiving the funds. So we had budgeted to use some of that funding because we hadn't received the millage money yet. This will be the last fiscal year that we would budget that. So far, we haven't needed to, and so we're not using it. And we didn't use any last year either. We were able to not need it, but we did budget it in the event that we needed to use it. We'd have the availability, but you can see we're way under because we haven't used any of it. So that's actually a good story, even though it looks like a negative revenue.
So. If I'm understanding, it's basically that the revenue is less because we asked for less. We just didn't need that.
Right, so we get reimbursed.
Right.
That money is reimbursable. So if we don't need it, we don't draw down on the grant, so we don't receive the money. The budget allows for us to use it if we need to, but like I said, with the other revenues trending a little bit better, and the use of the pandemic relief funds, we haven't needed to. We may, if we get closer to the end of the year and revenues are flattening out and we need it, we may still have to use it. But we're unlikely to have to because we have the millage money coming pretty soon. So we're hoping, we're hoping we're gonna finish this year without using it as well, even though we budgeted for it.
If I might build on Dina's excellent explanation, just as a reminder for all of us, because this was a while ago, we had a conversation. This money pertains to a formula grant program from the FDA called 5307. They like to give their grants numbers so that it makes it hard to understand or keep them straight. 5307 is formula money. We get it without having to apply for it per se. It is intended to be capital money used for purchasing durable goods, equipment, whatever capital expense we need. They allow some flexibility into operating expenses. They are very begrudging in that allowance. A lot of agencies that are cash poor over rely on that, push it right up to the federal limit because they don't have enough operating or local support to pay for their operating. That gets them into a position when they go back to the feds and say, hey, we'd like a competitive grant for capital. The feds can look at it and say, well, you're not using all the money we give you. Well, you're using it, but you're not using it for the purpose we intend. Even then, we can only flex it to certain operating things. It's not a totally flexible thing. Lots of strings attached. As we went into the millage, and Mike may remember this conversation, part of the millage asked specifically, there was a chunk of that, I forget the decimal point in mills, specifically approved by this board to wean us off the reliance that we had developed on using 5307 for operating, so that we would sort of clear that off our books. So we'd be using federal capital dollars for capital projects only. To backstop our operating. The millage allows us to do that. What Dina is showing here is that she's basically making progress on that in advance, I think. So this is generally a good news story, but Jesse, thank you for catching it. It is a huge variance in that column and absolutely worthy of a question.
And, you know, that was a huge topic of conversation that happened last year. The larger transit agency is looking to start using the same methods that we were looking to stop using.
Mhm.
So I think, like, yeah, I started paying a little bit more attention to the federal. So, thank you.
Tweets my question, but I want to ask some more questions on building on what was just said. So is this a case of if you don't use it, you lose it?
No, the funding that we have is still there and we plan to use it for capital purchases. So we will use it for the projects that are in the capital plan instead of having to use it for operations.
So it will roll over from year to year or?
We do have it like a set number of years to use
Okay.
it. We're well within that. We're not at any risk of losing the funds if we don't use them for operations. We have plenty of capital needs, so we're good on that.
And this is a reimbursement.
It's
Like they
reimbursed.
check the receipts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we incur the expense, send them the receipts, they cut us a check, and so we don't actually have this money on hand,
Right.
they hold the money. And it goes through that kind of a complicated
I just
arrangement.
wanted to make sure I wasn't with how all these different grants and things come in, there are so many different strings attached.
Oh, yeah.
When they expire, I just wasn't sure where we landed in this particular instance, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? Mike?
Let me just mention, Dina was talking about capital versus operating expense dollars. We don't have it, there's not a specific table in here or anything that shows how much we're spending capitalized, at least it's not highlighted, but you can see it in the cash flow statement.
Yeah.
You can see cash from capital comes in, for example, but I think it might be worthwhile, and I think Gina and I talked about this in the past. In the future, maybe starting next year, to incorporate capital in capital out. And also see it in terms of the balance sheet of what's happening. In the capital. It's not that easy to pull.
Yes, we have talked about that. I concur. So I will, I had an idea that I'll run by the finance committee at some point, hopefully this year. To change the report just a little bit, the section that we had talked about, that maybe it doesn't get as much attention. There might be a way to kind of move some things around and include capital projects updated or something like that.
So dollars are dollars.
Yeah.
And some of them
Sort of.
used for operating.
Sort
As long as we don't use the word fungible, I'm fine.
of. Yeah, she doesn't like that.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We're gonna move on to, we had adjusted the agenda, so it's now the YTC activities 8.4, and Mr. Van is with us, but I apologize, I don't remember the last name. Johnson. Preston Johnson will be presenting. Look at my mouth.
Long day. Am I out of the way? Good spot here? Okay, good. So thank you for having me. I appreciate the chance or the opportunity to present to you all. Again, you know, we are really excited about this project. It's been, of course, one of the top capital priorities for TheRide for a long time, and we're excited that it's moving forward. So I'm here to give you a little bit of an update on the project. We restarted the planning process last October 2023. So we've made a good amount of progress in that time. We wanted to give you a little bit of an update. There's a few things in my presentation that many of you probably are very familiar with, but I wanted to go through it all just in case we do have online participants or if people watch it, after the fact. And again, and also I just wanted to say, if you have a question that comes up, I do have time for discussion and Q&A and things like that, but I do want this to be a discussion and feel free to raise your hand. Okay, so go ahead. The agenda quickly is just going to talk about the project description and context. Go a little bit through the history. We have many new faces and talk a little bit about what we've learned from the public engagement period and also just the work we've done thus far on the project and where we're headed. And leave it open for some discussion. So what do we want to accomplish? What does the TheRide want to accomplish? The kind of very basic goal is build a new transit center for downtown Ypsilanti. Everything we've heard so far, kind of those 3 bullet points there, needs to be larger and accommodate the growth that we have had since we did our expansion a little bit ago, and then also plan that we have in the TheRide 2045. And to do, add a lot more functionality and amenities to the transit center. Overall, like I said, we are very committed and excited about this project. We want to work with our partners to build a better transit center. But of course, nobody has unlimited resources, so do it in a very affordable, efficient way. Make sure we can get it built so that we can actually, it's a little bit of a critical path for us in terms of being able to carry out our full vision of the long-range plan. So the current facility sits at 220 Pearl Street in downtown Ypsilanti, block and a half up the road. And it is over 30 years old. It was built in 1993. So it's reached the end of its useful life. It's kind of a technical term, but that doesn't really necessarily mean that it's in very good condition. There's nothing wrong with it, but it has reached that point, and basically all the work that we've done prior to this has indicated that it is time for us to completely reconstruct the youth transit center. It's inadequate for our needs, but also the community's needs. And so it was, again, highlighted as TheRide 2045, one of our top capital projects for moving forward. Just to take you through a little bit of the context. So this is our service area in the gray boundary, including the TheRide. And so Ypsilanti Transit Center, downtown Ypsilanti, one of our 2 major hubs for transit service. Our service right now is very focused around those hubs. And so you can see that Ypsilanti Transit Center is a very centrally located spot for us. Good location. The little bit of a history. I'll just kind of highlight a few things of this. And I've gone over some of it. We have had service into Ypsilanti for nearly the entire time that we've been operating service, particularly along Washtenaw Avenue. So fixed route transit began in 1974 or around there. And so jumping quite ahead, built the YTC in 1993. In 2013, we added the city of Ypsilanti as a member municipality. And then did that 5-year transit improvement program, which expanded service, sort of, led to where we are today in terms of we've studied the center and know that the service from the expansion then and where we want to go, it's really crunch there at the transit center. We did the first phase of the study in 2017 to 2018, looking at the needs, looking at where we wanted to to potentially cite the YTC. And then kind of jumping to 2022, where we adopted the millage, and 2023 got the study restarted after a little bit of a hiatus. We have, as of last Monday, we have 11 routes. Yay. I added that little blue and white box there. So the 104 started on Monday, so we have 11 routes in our 6 bays, or 6 bus slips at the YTC. So everything's doubled up. Not that it's functioning well because of how we our frequency and how we've structured the service. It's functioning well, but it really isn't that much room for growth. And so I have this map here of the 11 routes. And then we can see here at the YTC, I know I needed some sort of way to probably kind of give you a comparison, but this is the breakdown of what the YTC looks like inside, where the gray areas are for the public waiting area, with 5 and 6 as the bathrooms. And then the purple area for the drivers. It's about 2,000 square feet, so I don't know how most houses are larger than that today, but maybe around house size. So and with 7 and 8, and the number 2 being, well, number 2 is information specialist, 7 and 8 are where we put all of the mechanical and IT and everything, and it's quite cramped, so. So to talk a little bit about the actual project history, as I mentioned, we did a needs assessment in 2017. It looked very, very closely at what size we need, had a robust public engagement period, and selected a lot of sites to do various levels of analysis to help us get down to a site selection, or one site selected. And so that recommendation was for the current site plus the parking lot surrounding it, working with the city of Ipsy to expand into that. We, on the map there, the aerial, the existing transit center is this here, the 220 blue rectangle. We own this parcel as well. And at one point, this was jointly owned or some sort of agreement between the city of Ypsilanti and EMU, but now it is fully owned by the city of Ypsilanti. And so you can see that, really here where our waiting area is, and some of the bays here are owned by the city of Ypsilanti. So the other part of that study in 2017 and 18 was developing some initial concepts. And so we got to that point, and then we were gathering funding, keeping the project going, but then of course COVID kind of ground things to a little bit of a halt. So if you want to, these are really just, you don't need to look carefully at these. These are what came out of 2018. I'll go through some updated ones of these in just a little bit, but these are sort of the concepts that rose to the top based on that site recommendation for the current site. So back in the fall, we hired a firm called BLZ with some consultant HDR to begin the next phase. So since it has been 5 years, we wanted to take a look at that work from 2018, do some updating and validating of that, and look at some additional concepts. The big part of that, though, will be the environmental review process. We are required to follow a very detailed process for that, for federal funding with the FTA. And so that's sort of the major push right now, is to look at that previous work and go and get that environmental review finished. We have engaged with the FTA already. They know that the project has restarted, and actually, I know in your packets, you may have seen a little note at the bottom of the issue brief that said we are granted or given a categorical exclusion for the project, which yes, it's very, very, very good news. We are really excited about that. So I don't pretend to be an expert on this, but what that essentially means is that the project now has a very, some targeted areas for environmental review, and so there will be a lot of detailed work there. However, it's still a lot less than if we had to do an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement. So it's very good news. And, one of the biggest parts of that is, that we will need to do, a section 106 review, which is for the whole area is within the historic district. And so that's gonna be one of our major, areas of focus over the next few months, is working through that process with the historic district and FTA and the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office. So anyways, that's very good news, lots of technical terms in there that I'm glad to have some help with, but we're excited about that. The schedule for the project, pushing hard in 2024 to complete this phase 2, again, which is the concepts, NEPA, and then initial schematic design. We'll probably end up around 30% design in this process, possibly a little bit more. And then 2025 to 2026, move into phase 3 and 4, which is essentially just taking that design a little bit, taking that in steps further. And aiming to start with the bidding and construction documentation in 2026, 2027, have the facility open in 2027. An ideal timeline, but so far we've gotten, good news from FTA, and we think we can stick to that schedule so far. And then the last little bit I just wanted to review was the funding. Again, we are, as we talked about a little bit with the millage, we're very thankful to everyone for the work that they've done with or did with the 2022 millage. It really helps us with using those capital reserves for projects like this. So which is wonderful. And then we did receive that 300,000 for planning from Senator Peters and the 7 million for construction from Debbie Dingle, Representative Dingle's office. Going forward, we are absolutely pursuing other competitive grant opportunities. The 7 million is quite a lot, but still not going to be enough to cover the construction. So certainly keeping an eye out for any opportunity there. But relying on those, if we win more grants, plus those capital reserves to fund the project. Wanted to pause there just a little bit, actually, because I wanted to hear if you had any questions first, but then, if there is any sort of thoughts on vision or what have you learned or heard about the YPC in the past? Some of you have been with us for a while, so just wanted to kind of have a little bit of a pause here to have that conversation.
Susan. So a question, you said 7 million, so first tease up, what is the total project budget for this?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. All our projections right now are based on that 2018 work. But then updated for inflation and the increases in construction costs that have occurred over COVID and things like that. Right now, very rough estimate of construction being around 18 with the 18 million with the planning and design and all of that being an additional around 5, I think, so 23 million total.
So that you spoke about the City of Ipsy's parking lot, that does not include any estimate of cost for land acquisition.
Actually, that does. We did include that in the design and planning phase.
And just, one other, which was in my old iteration, I worked with the DDA here in Ipsy, and the pieces of the puzzle included the old Ipsy Transit Center really not being part of the larger whole, sort of like its own location. And just the work that could be done to integrate it into the larger IPSI. And the downtown, I guess, and that's gonna involve things where the city's gonna need to partner on lighting, it's gonna need to partner on just wayfinding. Just that it isn't just a standalone building, it should be at the heart of this section of the downtown.
Mhm.
And so how that's gonna describe itself as the project takes shape, I don't know, because it will involve partnerships.
Mhm.
But it was expressed as just like an island. And then there was this whole other thing all around it, so
Mhm.
just. But what that will look like, I have no idea.
No, thank you. Yeah, we definitely appreciate that. I think the city of Ypsilanti is also looking at, they've been a great partner, really, really involved. And they're also looking at it like this will be likely one of the largest capital projects in Ypsilanti for many years. And many years in the past too. So they are really looking at it like as a way, how do we integrate it? How do we think about many of those points that you made?
Back to the funding. When you talked about funding. Looking at opportunities, are there any particular stage of the design that will make it possible that you have something that you can go to the FDA or some other agency that pass? When would that be?
Mhm. Yeah, it's an excellent question. I'm not an expert on grants, but my understanding is that once we work through that NEPA process, that is where that we become a lot more competitive when we apply. We certainly can apply before then. But once we have that complete, that's when we become, a little bit, we get some extra points in the applications. I don't know if Dina has any other.
I could probably add just a little bit to what you said. We're already talking to the FTA about this project, as Gretchen mentioned, she did a nice presentation to them just last week. So they're getting familiar with the project, and part of something that we're doing beyond just this project is having conversations with them about lots of projects in our capital plan. And part of what they do is try to help us find ways to maximize federal funding. Believe it or not, they know that if there's funding out there, they want to see it spent on good projects with good recipients, which we have a good relationship with the FTA. And so we'll be meeting with the FTA. I meet Gretchen and I meet with FTA together, and we meet with them on other projects as well. So it's an integrated process, and any opportunity that they think of, or any way we can structure a project or another project to maximize available federal funding, will be focused on that. So there are lots of touch points throughout the process, and anytime we can find a way to structure those better in order to maximize opportunities, we'll do that.
And if I might throw in one more thing about the federal funding. The other way to think about it is to put yourself in the shoes of the grant makers at FTA. Because they get bombarded with proposed projects all the time, some of which, if I'm honest, are very flaky and have gone out and sort of drawn on the back of the napkin. And you get burned by those once or twice, and you learn very quickly not to give grant awards to those projects because they go over budget, they aren't delivered on time. All sorts, they create local havoc and become very controversial. They want to see us get further and further through things like NEPA, things like small starts and other processes. Those planning studies narrow the field from their point of view because they force projects through a winnowing sort of gauntlet, if you will. The weakest do not survive. The best projects keep getting refined and better. The cost estimates get sharper. Environmental things like environmental risk, like what's under that parking lot. We haven't done soil testing yet. We're gonna need to. That's the kind of thing you don't want to crop up late in the project and blow it off, scheme. So, as we go through these processes, we survive that gauntlet, we become more attractive to them because the risk on their end goes down. So it is still a competitive process in many ways, but this is heading very much in the right direction.
When the estimated completion date, 2027. How, by what time do we need to have funding pretty well?
Yeah, so we do have the funding right now, although not necessarily board approval yet. But we have. Part of what when we talked about the capital reserve, we said a portion of this will be used to leverage as much as we can to get more federal funding. But to the extent we aren't able to complete the project, we would be likely to ask the board for approval to use the capital reserve to finish the project. It's one of the highest, it is the probably highest priority right now. At least it's the way it sits in the capital plan now. We have time still to go through the capital plan with the board and the funding sources again this year. There'll be another opportunity next year. I would say my comfort level would be by next year. We should get consensus about, from the board, if it's okay to use the capital reserve. I don't think we need it as early as this year, but I do think at this point, knowing that we have it and already have support in the budget at least, to say we can apply for grants and use this for the match. That's also a very attractive component, but I think if we're getting into the end of 25 and headed into 2026, we'll have to start construction. And at that point, if we haven't identified funding, there could be a delay. So I would say by the end of the next budget cycle, not this one, but the next one, we'd need to be clear about the funding.
Well, I understand what you say, Dina. We may get to a point where we may be dipping into the reserve more than just in the max.
It's possible, essentially, that's gonna be up to the board.
That'll be a tough
Right.
discussion.
Yes.
A lot will depend on how successful we are pursuing other outside funding sources between now and then.
Yeah.
We can lock all that funding down through outside sources, and it doesn't force you to think about priorities with the capital reserve. You'll probably be quite happy to see the project proceed quickly. If it forces you, if we don't have enough money, and it forces us to think about, well, which other project do we want to delay to move this one forward, that it may slow down a little bit. And once that's done, it's the procurement of construction, the actual construction, like it is not a vast process, even when you have all that stuff nailed down. So just managing expectations.
And one more question. You referred to it, it's in the package. Reference. That this is included in the long-range plan.
Mhm.
The long-range plan extends to 2045.
Mhm.
Part of this, YTC project would increase capacities, throughput, YTC. But I just want the numbers that are in the long-range plan. I looked it up the other day. Assume that overall, not through the YTCs, but overall to the ride, something like 150% increase in ridership.
Mhm.
Well, what do you think will be coming out of this project? Will that take us through 2045, 20 years away? Well,
That's an excellent question. In terms of the bus throughput, that has been one of our top, pieces of data input for the consultants. So yes, it will accommodate everything that we have planned through 2045 in terms of service. There may be, I think, a little bit hard, in the in-between time where we, what our service looks like today and what the service will look like in 2045 if we're able to implement all of that. There may be some periods where it is a little bit tough to fit all the buses in an ideal manner. But everything that we looked at seems to indicate that we can still, accommodate the operations there and maintain a really high level of service. Just wanted to caveat that there is a little, could be some, transition or growing pains, I guess I'll say. As the network transitions from what we have today, which is very focused on each of the hubs, to something that the TheRide 2045 details, which is a little bit more out on a grid. So, in terms of the capacity in terms of passengers and customers, the facility we are looking at, 3 times as large. So with the 150% increase, I know today there's already a pinch, but we think with 3 times larger, that we can accommodate the 2045 projections and growth in ridership as well.
This raises another question. And that is, it looks like we're not going to be achieving the numbers that we have in our long-range plan, 2045. Might the option be to do the 6 stages that could either go forward with, or not go forward with it, save money. You don't really have capacity.
You're asking about phasing the YTC itself.
Yes, in terms of capacity.
That's something we could certainly look into. That's not something we've really talked about too much in our planning right now. I think it would present some difficulties in terms of, we have a lot of needs today, and the facility as we've kind of envisioned it, it doesn't break those up in terms of, it's sort of passengers and the staff, the driver areas. I'm not sure exactly how we would phase those differently, but something we could certainly think about. Yeah, go ahead.
This might be actually, these lines of questions might be really good segues into your conceptual ideas.
That's true.
Because what you're gonna see is building a bus terminal, there's a certain minimum operating requirement for the bus bays. That might, that's kind of hard to imagine phasing that in, because that's kind of an all or nothing thing. The building that goes on the platform, thinking about it, because I've not considered that question before, the building itself is something that could hypothetically be phased. So that might be a way to defer some costs in the future. If we're really successful at getting outside funding, it might make sense to use the funding when it exists to, I want to say, overbuild in years 1 through 10, knowing that by years 11 through 20, we're going to need that space. So there's a lot of considerations in there, but you've opened up a different track of thinking that I know hadn't occurred to me, so thank you.
But that might be something that would save us from getting further capital reserve.
Yeah, if it came to that.
I mean, it does seem like a pretty optimistic forecast, and one that we should really aspire to. I completely favor. Maybe we won't be able to achieve that ridership growth. It's been tough.
Rich?
So I think you might be getting to this if you were going to be talking about this site plan, kind of. The last questions that Mike asked was actually something I was wondering about, because when I looked at the options, and feel free to be like, you're gonna answer this in a little bit. There's some common themes across them. That part of it is one, it's just like, yeah, I mean, this new larger transit facility is 3 times bigger, but is that actually what we need, especially beyond 2045? Depending on what you are predicting and how you actually want to plan out, because I know you're thinking of some different hubs. But if you were to have like a blank sheet of paper without some of these challenging elements in here, would it actually be better at 4 times or 5 times bigger? It's just that we, based on the space that we have available, we only maximize it 3 times. Because for me, like I'm hearing like 30 years is kind of like that lifespan for the usefulness.
Right.
That means that potentially 30 years we're gonna have to modify it, and it could be that we are just locked in because we have maximized the space. And I don't know the overall plans for the regional hubs that may alleviate that challenge, but I just wanna like something that's kind of bouncing my head is about like okay, are we gonna be kind of in a tough situation in 30 years where we can't do anything more with this particular location, especially considering that they're not even counting in these aspects, the elements that the historic buildings that we work about. That's the thing that I notice the most, like there's certain blue buildings that do not move and we're moving stuff around that. Are we able to get enough buses at that point?
Right, it is, I mean, it is a tough question, that federal funding is, that 30-year time span and should have the entire RIDE 2045 implemented by then. Beyond that, we don't know exactly what, is coming or in line for the transit service. The work we've done so far to look back at what the 2017-2018 numbers were, indicate that the 3 times larger would suffice for what we need. You're right that there are certain constraints with the site. We have a lot of things that we need to consider to build around. But that 3 times larger is projected to be enough. Plus, we are going to revisit that again after we work through these concepts. We will be doing another very detailed facility programming, where we look even more in depth at the sizes that we'll need for everything. Right now, it's very conceptual, high level, that we haven't, really gotten to that point yet of trying to figure out what the specific spaces are for each need.
So building on what Rich just said, and I think we jumped in ahead, but I remember when the Wood Transit Center was rebuilt. I know that a back door was created. You can't see the back door, but there was a way that something was framed out in the framing so that a back door could be created. When you think about that, and is there a way the building can be planned? So because we're on a certain footprint, could we then go up? Will there be future planning for possibly going up?
That's, to Matt's point, I think, that's one of the things that really, that could be phased for sure, where we think about how do we prepare this facility for going, up. And that is something that we're considering even right now. Do we need the 2nd floor right away, right from the beginning, to accommodate all of the needs that we think we'll need within the next, to meet the needs that we have today, plus those that we have in the next 20 years. So that, I think, just kind of to play devil's advocate a little bit, we just want to make sure that, once you do go to multiple floors, that's when you start really increasing those costs, because you have elevator shafts, you have just a lot more structural work that you need to have done, and makes the building more costly. So something to, to consider, to think about, and really carefully kind of decide whether we need that now, whether we should think about, do we want to prepare it for the future, or do we just want to say that's the people 30 years from now problem.
Susan had a question.
Sort of along those lines of sort of following on Rich and now said, we can't know everything.
Right.
So, an example is I'm looking at that map, it just seems like a natural at some point, there's gonna be airport service from Memphis Landing. And so, how do we prepare for the curb space for that bus, which is not part of our fixed route? I mean, as Ipsy continues to grow in this region, this part of the county continues to grow, I'd love to think of regionalism as we think of this. And maybe it's connections between us and Dearborn and stuff, but certainly airport, there's like a natural down the road. So if there's a way to prepare the area, if not the actual building, for that potential, it seems now is that time. And however the building is situated on its site, and how the curb space is allocated. Because we could not have anticipated TheRide and the B2A2. We could not have anticipated the demand that we see there. And I think that's sort of a natural growing area for the eastern part of the county.
Yeah, and we do think this site is a really great site, but it is constrained. And so I do think we absolutely need to consider the regional services that should be added here. And where they might go. Right now, we wouldn't have space at the platform to accommodate them. But there's certainly curb space in the area. There's even, I know someone had the idea of using the existing bays more for regional service, something, there's some options out there. Something that we certainly want to think about. Plus, we also are doing a lot of work to try to make sure that other modes like TheRide and TheRide have more of a dedicated space right now. They pull up to the curb on the backside of that wall in the parking lot at the YTC. It's not ideal at all. So considering all modes plus biking, scooters.
If I might add something before Gretchen goes into the very exciting rendering. Every terminal project trying to do a bunch of stuff. And there's always trade-offs. So for example, we're talking a lot about space right now and how can it be future-proofed by accommodating as many things as possible. We could easily do that by going about 20 miles outside of town and buying a farmer's field, plenty of space. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense. We want to be downtown. Why do we want to be downtown? Because downtown is awesome and it's a destination. It's the largest concentration of destinations in this immediate area. It's also central. So it works really well as a transfer point. People going across Ypsilanti, maybe from the Rawsonville area to EMU, for example. It's a great spot for a transfer center just because it's centrally located for downtown because it's a major cluster of destinations. It's doing several different things. Yes, downtown is a constraint because it's crowded, but it's also good because it's crowded. So we have these trade-offs that we're trying to put an adequately sized piece of transportation infrastructure in an area that's got other people in it. I think we have the exact same issue over at the lake, and the former Wylot is even like that issue, this issue on steroids. So like 3 or 4 people trying to use the same piece of land. So this is just an inherent thing, and we're having really good conversations about that. We do think downtown is the right place for the terminal. And that means we've got neighbors. That means we got to find a way to sort of get as much as we can into that space. 30 years is a good run. That's the point when the feds kind of say, okay, our money is used. And they stop caring about whether you knock it down. Really good pieces of transportation infrastructure can go for 100 years and still serve their purpose. And I think the crew here is balancing all the things that need to be balanced. And your questions are excellent. I think they're thinking about many of the same things. And I think the renderings will give you an idea of sort of how they are trading off the various pros and cons and the things that we've got to consider.
Thank you, excellent. Okay, keep going. So the engagement that we've had currently was started in April 22nd. Running through next week, end of next week. However, we have been doing engagement since the beginning of the project last November, when we did a lot of internal kickoff and department meetings, and we've continued to have those. We've formed a technical working group with the city of FC plus a lot of our experts internally. And then kind of listed a lot of other things that we've been doing this period. But really the idea is to really start understanding how things have changed. Obviously, a lot of things have changed since COVID. Travel patterns, needs. So making sure that we still have, for example, the right site, which everything I'll talk about in a second, everything in paint that we do. But trying to make sure that we bridge this gap between how the world looked in 2018 and how it looks today. We've gotten really great feedback. We handed out over 200 flyers, have close, I think, last number I heard was around 75 surveys, online surveys. So we came out to the early May, first Friday event here. So just doing a lot of engagement to really try to get the word out about the project, help people learn about it. make sure they know it's restarted. But then also, as I'll go over in a minute, talk about some of the updated concepts we have. I think, I've covered a lot of this, but overall, what we've heard from all the engagement is that there is a need today, and that need is only set to grow. There's a lot of feedback that we've received in terms of the size. The driver's area is only room for about 3 drivers. The bathrooms are too small, not enough bathrooms overall. Really lacks amenities. There's good seating along the wall, but the interior area is small. A lot of the other amenities are just, it's hard because of how the size of the building and how old it is. But we did hear some positives, and overall, people have been very happy with the customer service staff that we've been able to add there since last fall, because of that knowledge. Everyone has been very appreciative of that. Plus, it does have that, some natural lighting, the big windows. And again, we've heard a lot of positive things about the location. Really haven't heard any feedback that says we really need to look at other locations. This is, to Matt's point, this is a wonderful, really central area. That's great for transit service. Great for a lot of other things though too, of course, so those constraints. Go on. So the, just kind of a quick overview or aerial of the area. This is the current site with the parking lots and, yes, but why don't we just, we could have the next one, since we already talked about this a little bit. So, the expanded footprint at the current location, as we've been talking about, it can meet the operational facility needs outlined in the 2045 plan, as well as input that we've gathered on needs thus far. So just to quickly go through this, the sort of green is this is the existing YMTC facility, and then the brick wall. Someone's described these as sticks of butter, little sticks of butter. Now I can't unsee. So those are the 6 bus bays that we have. We do, it's a little bit hidden by the words here, but we do utilize Washington Street quite heavily for lay-by and spare and training and things like that. So not an official bay, but it's heavily used. The dark blue are buildings surrounding the area that do have a historic marker on them. And then the light blue are properties that are over 70 years old. And the gray are under 70 years old. Plus, I guess it's hidden, but there's a light gray. There's actually a proposed development. I don't believe it's been officially, no, okay. It hasn't been approved yet, but there is a proposed development across the street on Washington that you'll see in some of the other ones, but I just want to point it out now. If you've been to the YTC, that really nice, the house behind it, so that's has that historic marker. And so that's something to keep in mind as we go through these, the concepts that I'll go through next. Each of the concepts are feasible. We made sure this is preliminary thing, turning radii, things like that. All of them are feasible from a sort of high level planning look. All of them include the 3 times, the facility that's 3 times larger. We are trying, from this early stage, are ensuring that it's safe and efficient operation for buses. It will accommodate future growth and generally have improved accommodations and amenities for everyone.
Archie, can I just ask one quick question, just to level set myself? For all these plans, is the plan to continue using the existing YTC once 2028 rolls around, or is that before? Do they want to have access like the bus bays?
That is very up in the air, and that's actually one thing that would be great to hear feedback on as I go through these. So it's a great question, and I'll talk a little bit about that as I go through each concept.
Yeah, it was our box, you had used expansion and other slides.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah,
Yours.
no, that's a good point, yeah.
I think there's some good reasons.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I just had maybe an off the wall question. Do any of these um scenarios take into account like the future need for refueling at this location as we consider what the fleet look like later on down the road, or if our territory were to expand?
So that is something that has been definitely provided as a piece of input and that we've been looking at. These are very early on concepts. You won't see any infrastructure for, battery electric or anything like that, but it's something that we are certainly considering for it. It's just that we really haven't reached that stage in the planning for the site.
Thank you.
If I might offer one kind of clarification, just to make sure. There's a big distinction between the garage and the passenger. Yes, battery electric buses may be the one thing where we recharge a vehicle at a terminal.
Mhm.
We would never refuel, we would never house diesel or hydrogen at a passenger facility. Just an important distinction, because it does occasionally get mixed together. Then we don't put anything volatile like that near a customer.
Right, yeah, excellent. That's why I only mentioned battery electric was, we could possibly, put those at the in-road or at the transit center, but we wouldn't do any sort of hydrogen infrastructure or here, so. Okay, so thank you kind of through option A, which again, I'm gonna kind of talk about a little bit of the differences between, and I'd love to hear what people think about them, what they like, dislike. So this first option, you'll maybe recognize from 2017, 2018. It was moved up on Pearl Street and we kind of pushed it back into the mid block to see how well it would fit. It does fit. There's 10 bays there at the platform, which all of our projections for 2045 indicate that we need like pretty much at minimum 10. So that's why we show that extra bus. We would likely need to utilize the curve more than you'll see in some of the other options. You were hoping for between 10 to 12 to accommodate that full 2045 vision. The kind of the big thing about this one is that it does have a fairly narrow platform, which means a narrow building as well. So that kind of goes back to a lot of that discussion we had before, where maybe this one would push us into that basement or second floor because we just really don't necessarily have the rooms or the area on the platform that we would need to accommodate all of the spaces internally that we would like to have. It does still preserve some of the parking lot, but of course takes up quite a bit of the parking. It does preserve both of those historic buildings, though, over on the east side on Long Washington Street, as well as the house. The other big point on this one is during construction, we can maintain operations at the existing YTC, which is a big benefit. And then to your question, there's really no necessarily anything planned for the existing YTC. So there's a lot of opportunity there. Like I said, it's been well maintained. It's pretty in good shape. There's no necessarily need to demolish it. But the question is, would we need it? Does the city of Ypsilanti want it? What happens with it? There is a lot of potential for development along Pearl Street with this scenario, which the city of Ypsilanti has been pretty excited about. Go to the next one. This one is very similar to the one that we had in 2018 as well, where it's more of a wedge that is right along Pearl Street. So there's a lot of efficiencies there in terms of space, but also drivers are used to that right now. So this one can accommodate a lot more right at the platform, right at the transit center, while also preserving quite a bit of the parking lot. that's, what, the city would like, or the public. And it does give us probably the most amount of space on the transit platform, so that the biggest space to work with in terms of the facility that we can build. Of course, the big downside to this one is that it removes the two historic buildings on Washington Street. Now, there has been some consideration of maybe we could build the platform around those buildings. I know, you know, it's nothing necessarily preventing us from doing that, but, so this is the big downside there, but still maintains the house. Because that house would be very difficult to, you know, to move, since it has that historic marker, so preserves that, but does present challenges in terms of that historic structure, or those historic structures on Washington Street. But then a lot of space for, you know, we are, the other thing to consider is part of the ride 2045 includes high capacity transit on Washtenaw, which would be the 60-foot buses versus the 40-foot that we have today. So also trying to think about how we accommodate those at the transit center.
How do you take care of the transition when you're tearing down the existing building?
Right, that's the other thing with this one, is we would need to demolish that first and probably move off-site. Possibly we could fit, I'm not sure how, but in the parking lot. But we would likely need to do something, I don't know, if I wasn't, around, but I know for like the BTC, we set up some temporary,
Yeah, on the one lot, so there was temporary, trailers.
Right.
Community.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly, so we'd have to do, that for this, if we demolish that building.
May I ask a quick question? Matt had mentioned earlier about 30 years being like the lifespan of the HEA that doesn't care about monies and how they're used. So with this site plan, we would be tearing down the old one, which it hasn't been there for 30 years, I don't believe.
It has,
Or is it?
what's the term, extended the federal interest,
Okay.
Yes,
something along those lines, which is basically the bureaucratic way of saying, we're good,
Okay,
you don't have to pay us back if you knock it down.
okay,
Because they do actually beam count out the life cycle of it. So once it hits, actually that was like 25 years, but maybe 30 years track.
was,
We're past that with the YTC.
Okay.
That's not a.
right. Yeah, it might, I've always heard 30, but you're right, it might be 25. But this, it was built in 1993, so we
Oh.
passed that 30-year threshold.
I thought it was built in 82, but yeah. That's got a real Tron-y, you know what I mean?
Nostalgia.
Yeah.
So this is the third option that we came up with after, we had, you know, probably 10 at one point, but, where it combines the two other options a little bit. It is a wedge, it's a bit hard to see that, but it does have more of an angle, to the transit platform. And moves that mid-block. So we do gain the use of the existing YTC, during construction, but then also potentially afterwards. We have that development potential along Pearl. The parking lot again is reduced, pretty similar to the option A. This one though preserves the light blue building there on Washington Street. That one's preserved, but we would demolish the one just north of there. Preserves the Harmony Collective House. And then, this does accommodate the 11 bays right at the platform, right at the transit center. We took a look just initially at if the longer edge, you know, along, the south side could accommodate an articulated 60-foot bus. And we think it can. Again, these are preliminary, but we did try to think about, you know, the turning radii and things like that. And plus the area on Washington Street is also long enough to accommodate a 60-foot bus. So this one, yeah, has, you know, kind of a combination of both options. gives a little bit of a different sort of idea of how to work the transit service, similar to option A, but. So any other thoughts on any of these options or any questions about it? Go ahead.
Mike was, raised a couple comments earlier about, future and expansion and thinking about how the area is gonna grow. Susan already mentioned it as well. So like airport ride and those sorts of things. If we went with this model, there would be the possibility that those could then stage right on Pearl Street. But I also have a question. If we go with this model and we own the building, would we be able to maybe run it out to, say, Michigan Flyer or HUD2 or whatever, or another corporation? How would the feds feel that? I'm just thinking about way in the future, not like next decade, but maybe in 45 years.
Sorry, are you talking about the current YTC?
I'm
or-
sure, yeah,
or the-
you have a current one,
Which one?
he's still there.
Mhm.
And if we didn't tear it down, and we wouldn't need it for our own operations, because now we've got this brilliant new facility that's coming in.
Mhm.
Would we then be able to possibly run it out either to other transit agencies or, the city or whatever, but also it seems then we would be able to use Pearl Street. If the airport ride were to come to Ypsilanti, then that would make a perfect area, and we wouldn't have to worry about how we would accommodate them in car trains.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know, spitballing,
Right, yeah, I think. I know that renting out, there's a lot of stipulations for the facility, you know. If it's under that threshold of 25 or 30 years, I guess I'm not quite sure of facilities that are past that, what we can, that's.
I think if it's
Thinking about
past
it,
that,
sure.
there's a lot more flexibility, but
Yeah.
within, when they have an interest in the facility. And they're funding it for the use of public transportation, we have to be careful about that. I've worked with facilities that are used for public. As a public facility and also have rental space and things like that. And we had to be very clear about what space would be used for public, or whether we were gonna lease out the space because it changes the eligibility of the funding for the project. So it does matter how we plan to use the facility in terms of how we can fund it with federal funding.
yeah, I was just thinking, the way RTC, it just, kind of hold stadium. That it might be, if we're not using it, it might be a really good resource for some sort of funding.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I was thinking,
Mhm. Mhm.
Susan.
So, a couple just questions.
Yeah.
The first two have to do with the properties. So we're showing pictures of buildings being demolished. How involved are the property owners? And, are they thrilled about this? And two, is a sort of related question, is there a scenario where you just pick it up and move the building? Now, this is something the university is wrestling with as it's doing its projects, is moving buildings. So those are sort of two related to the first question, which is those buildings that somebody owns. Here we're talking about demolishing.
Right, I know, it feels very odd, I know, to be talking about these properties. Actually, we have not engaged with the property owners because we really are not. We have to follow very certain, rules for the federal, environmental review process. And so, we could approach them and just introduce the project, kind of keep it at a very high level, but, we really are not allowed to enter into any sort of even edge of negotiation with the land owners until we have more of the process complete. So, yeah, the short answer is no, we have not engaged with them yet because we want to be very careful about the process, the process. And so your point of moving buildings, that is something actually that we are planning to take a look at as we go through our environmental review. Again, it take quite a bit of resources, we think, but that's something that we have definitely considered as we go through this environmental review process. One of the, this here is a garage for the house. It would be really nice if we had you know, there's a kind of a pinch point right there. There's enough space, but still kind of a bottleneck. What if we move this here, or, you know, things like that, that we're trying to consider, to give us more flexibility on this site.
The second question, which is to look at the entirety of that path to the block. There's the building, but then there's the bays, and I know with Blake, there's always a concern about having transit service where our patrons have to cross the street. But as long as we plug the curb line, we can wrap around Fourth Avenue, we can wrap around Fifth Avenue. We're looking at a full block because our patrons don't have to cross the street. As we look at this, other than whatever small traffic there might be from those buildings under the parking lot, is there a way to keep as much curb space as possible for all these expansion ideas? And keep the building as sort of a central discussion, but not lose track of the fact that you've got all this real estate where we're hugging curbs that keep our patrons safe. Setting aside the parking lot and how we might maximize that. The bigger question is, this is our once in a lifetime opportunity. And then what's left over, you can make a parking lot. It'd be a shame to not think of it as not only the real estate that the transit center sits on off the street, but to miss the chance to say we've got a lot of curb space where, again, our patrons are not endangered of the crossing somebody's driveway. How to keep that curb space seems like a really important growth opportunity. And then let the parking lot fall where it may. Again, that's real estate for then redevelopment, for instance. If the curb, though, is an additional asset to this analysis, where we're close to the building, but not immediately adjacent to. And be ashamed to lose Pearl Street, be ashamed to not be looking at Washington Street. Again, our patrons stay safe because they're on the same block without having to cross the street. But they may not be exactly adjacent to the building. So for instance, like airport service. Right now, we stand out on the corner, the Y lot, we're not in the transit law, but we're in that safe zone. It seems like this is an opportunity to expand our understanding of the safe zone for our purposes, for those patrons. And then go, because the number of parking spaces we're saving seems like a really small thing. Given the other alternative, which is the lost opportunity to keep that curb. That curb is the valuable asset in our location into the future. Especially if you're looking at longer buses. Now is not the time to let go of the curb space.
Absolutely, and I think even with this design, or even the first option, we're gonna need that curb space no matter what. For, you know, we did build in some space here, maybe here, for lay-by or stands. But realistically, you know, I think the curb space along Washington and Adams is very critical to think about.
And Pearl.
And
I
Pearl.
mean, we see the sticks of butter moved off Third Street. It'd be a shame not to keep those sticks of butter at least as a holding place.
If I might, there's another element here that's actually. When in 2018, when we were working on this before, it's a very big deal for the local community, which is the central business district of Ipsy was very concerned about losing park. There isn't a lot of it in central Ypsilanti, and it's in sort of weird configurations in the middle of another block, for example. And that parking lot is significant to some of the business owners. Moving the bus terminal off Pearl Street does, yeah, like I'm appreciating this conversation because it makes me see more value in keeping the old YTC, even though we only own the corners. I should remember, like, we don't own the whole central part of the platform. That's city property. We had a stakeholder meeting a week or so ago, and what could be done with the old YTC beyond transit? There was a lot of interest in that conversation. Pearl Street is one way, in part because of the bus operations on the street. If those bus operations weren't there anymore, Pearl Street could become two-way street again. So that has value to the community. Returning this to parking even closer to the central business district has value to the community. Developing this housing space. What could be done with the old YTC building, not for us, but for other parts of the city of Ypsilanti? All those ideas were sort of kicked around. Nothing was promised in any way, but I'm seeing even, from this conversation, some good ideas about it's residual value to us as well. We shouldn't fail to take note of.
Including, sorry to interrupt, but the corner at Pearl and Washington. A corner in downtown is prime real estate. And I hate to give anything up that down the road might be valuable, either. For instance, if I move that house, that's a great place to move that house. And it's just, that corner is really wide. And we're not seeing it because we run a transit operation. But from a urban fabric point of view, there's a lot of asset there for us down the road that I think to use. If we didn't have to.
Absolutely. One of the things too that we've been looking at are just the views, that in some ways I think people have a lot of differing opinions on this, someone at the historic district commission actually asked me, can we go underground with everything?
Really?
Yes, because they had seen some international transit stations and it was just nice to keep that historic character very consistent. So we're not gonna build underground.
Forget that $23 million. That's a rounding error.
But that's something that we are really taking into account, like what, if we move this mid block, what are the views there? How can we make this, mesh into that historic urban fabric? Do we want it on Pearl Street to really highlight that, this is a hub, this is where, you can put lots of destinations and, have some of that other development, along the curves and along, see those views from the transit center itself.
One last question, does the transit agency prefer off-street to on-street? Or do you have a preference as professionals that if you had your optimal transit center?
It depends somewhat on the function of the transit center, but by and large, off-street is considered superior because just for bus maneuvering, avoiding traffic and cars. So off-street is a strong preference. And we do have the capacity in this space to do more of it. And that's definitely very, very attractive part of it. I mean, and if we haven't said it before, like the whole ring with all the, we call sawtooth bus bays, no cars in there at all. Something worth mentioning, we take for granted. No cars, pedestrian access in that space is curtailed. There's some crossing at crosswalks, no bicycles if we can avoid it. Just so the buses have the freedom to maneuver safely. Is an important deal, or frankly, even go around the terminal if they had to, which we sometimes need to do for operation reasons.
Yes, ignore these people right here. We're not gonna go there. Any other questions on any of the?
Gretchen, you sure demonstrated to me how difficult a decision it is to determine the layout. I'm curious, in general, not specifically, but in general, how you can go forward. How are you going to go forward? Trying to make a decision with these options and potentially other ones you might.
Excellent question. So we had a very detailed set of criteria from 2017 to 2018 that we are looking back at to make sure we're still, there was a lot of very, very focused criteria on operations there. Now we have some additional criteria that we are looking at in terms of historic preservation. We want to think about the operations during construction, things like that. So we're kind of creating this, you know, the list of what are the goals, objectives, and those criteria. And we're actually planning, once we have the public engagement period finished, which should finish at the end of next week. Coming together as a team to do a little bit of a charrette, we'll call it, I guess, to hear feedback from all the public engagement, but also look at those criteria and think about how each of these concepts measure up to those criteria. And then trying to advance a concept that we think meets the most needs and the most of the feedback that we've heard from this month of engagement. So nothing, not like a, you know, it won't be a table or we check mark certain boxes or rate. We didn't want to necessarily get into some of that in terms of finagling over the numbers and things like that, but coming together as a team to really think about, you know, we've done a lot of engagement with, we did talk to the union today. We will have some drop-in listening sessions next week for all internal staff. And then all the public open houses that we've had, really kind of internalizing that to think about how we choose the site, because we will need to choose that site to make sure that we are moving through that environmental review process. They would like to see a schematic, you know, the 15 and 30% schematic design as part of that environmental review. So it won't necessarily be that we have it set in stone in terms of the concept that we pick, but you know, as we go further in the process, it will of course get harder to go back and revisit other concepts. But it's all up to what we hear from the FTA and our continued discussions with the public and internal staff.
And I'm sorry, but I know you said we can't negotiate. But is everything on the table with the city as regards to the parking lot? It'd be a shame to go so far down, let's say this is our preferred path. Only then to find out that they're not open to playing, you know, they don't want this direction. So how does one do this planning and not at least have some assurance that this is potentially an open, an option, I guess?
Yeah, and we brought the city of Ypsilanti on very early. We gave it to them, had a full day to a field review last November. We have heard some feedback from them that it's actually pretty mixed about whether they think they need the parking or not. To Matt's point, you know, it is at times a very utilized parking lot. Overall, it's not heavily used. And so there's been a lot of discussions about that every time we meet with them. So far, we haven't heard any feedback from them that says, no, we absolutely cannot use this parking lot. So we feel that we've gotten their support. They know that the project is in development, and we continue to take their feedback on how many spaces. I've heard some feedback in terms of people want some pervious surfaces, things like that. So all things that we're trying to gather and internalize as we move forward.
I'll also mention that I've had a direct conversation with their city manager. They're very consciously aware of our aspirations. I don't think anyone's unclear about what we're talking about doing. As Gretchen mentions, their staff have been part of the process, and Andrew and I have talked about, without getting into negotiation, how do we, you know, get closer to making sure the city was okay with this direction. But the general sort of political feedback thus far has actually been fairly, I would go so far as to say positive. Mixed, because yes, there are some people who care a great deal about this parking lot or care about the merchants who care about this parking lot.
Right.
And we do not want to discount or under consider that factor. However, I think, especially compared, I'll be honest, with the reception we got for these ideas when they were first floated in 18. Because we floated all this public, we had meetings around town, like, we've discussed this before. That reception was much chillier, because I think the interest in that parking lot was much more acute. Since then, a lot of things politically have changed, in the city. And this generation of leaders, I think, sees a lot of value in transit and in rebuilding a terminal. And I've been impressed with how warm that reception has been. Certainly, they haven't promised anything, and they are certainly being clear that they need to talk to their constituents and the property owners and all that. So be very clear about that, but I would say a warm reception.
Mhm.
I mean, I think there's been an evolution of understanding that a surface level parking lot is not like the highest and best use of land, right, downtown, so. Hopefully that's what we're hearing,
Mhm.
and we do have some assets, it's interesting to even be able to have the conversation, like I was very much trained, like. You can't talk about property that you don't own, and, but some of these are also, I wanted to ask, like, some of them are just old, they're not historic, right?
Correct.
Okay, and I think it's a bit, right, I mean, there's a big difference between.
Right, without going into too much detail, you're absolutely right. And so that's actually a big part of the environmental review is looking at. Would we diminish the potential for these buildings to be part of that historic register? So that's a big part of what we have to do as our next step. So it doesn't preclude even demolishing it if. If we determine that it has no realistic chance of being part of that, or moving it, something like, but it's definitely one of the big steps that we're taking next to look at.
And as part of that next phase, like threat process, it could also be like, what would you like to see along Pearl Street, right? Like, what are some of the, I think it would be interesting to hear like what the values and aspirations are for that space as well.
Yeah, as Matt mentioned, that stakeholder engagement last week. That was loud and clear, that people really want to think about, what does the current YTC turn into? Or what do we do with Pearl Street? So we are gonna build that more into our process, of course. We don't own the street, the right of way, we only own the two little squares at the corners, so that would be a lot of discussions with the city of Ipsy. And they, they don't have any certain plans or even money to really necessarily do something right away. So it's definitely something that we need to keep working with the city on. Maybe there's some mutual benefits that we can gain throughout this process in terms of helping them with, realizing or having a vision for that.
Yeah,
area.
I think we had all probably come up with like 25 things that we'd want to see next to a transit center, other than like, no offense to the monastery, but like other than the monastery, right? So,
Mhm.
there could just be some nice, things that we want to see around transit,
Mhm.
that maybe we could work with the city and other stakeholders to see those things.
Mhm. Absolutely. The proposed development across there actually, has affordable housing, so we'll see how that unfolds, but it's already and I didn't mention this, but. The corner over here is the old, EMU business building. And, U of M, the Ypsilanti Health Center, they're renovating that building now. They'll add a coffee shop and some things like that, we've heard, so, just kitty corner to us is that really great investment of the Ipsy Health Center.
If I might, one other thing, I want to, without putting Jesse on the spot, talk about stakeholder meeting that we had the other week, because it was in this room, and we had 15, 20 people.
I think
on
that's
that.
funny.
So well attended, members of the public, members of City Hall, police chief, and others. And I felt like there was a really good dialogue, very similar presentation, lots of good feedback. A lot of interest in sort of the community things going on, not necessarily, like, we're talking a lot about the operations of the terminal, and I really appreciate that. That was not the focus of the conversation with the stakeholders. There were other things that were broached during those conversations that I thought were good to surface, things about, safety, the police presence, which has been something we've talked about in the past at board meetings. And I thought it was really good to hear a lot of that stuff, and I felt like even just members of the community got to talk to each other with us, just, taking a step back. So it was, I thought, a very useful part of the process. I wanted to ask Jesse what his impression of that conversation was, and as the representative for Ypsilanti, where his thinking is on all of this and that earlier conversation.
Yeah, it was really great, being in a room with all of those community members. And I don't know if it was just because it was a bunch of, public service roles, but, had people from the DBA, we had the Ozone House, the police chief, the mayor. Most of the conversation was about, it really centered around recognition of the transit center as an essential part of the community. So there was a lot of discussion about police presence, and I asked the police chief, why the transit center, and he said because it's so centrally located in such a central part of the city. And the library is right there. There's that medical center, and there's the medical center going in, to say nothing of Trinity Health and the Corner Health Center, which are already right there. Then the Avalon Housing is building just out of frame of Washington Street. So it really, I think that was the main, that's what the city is thinking about. What to do, a lot of it was what to do with the transit center itself, with the transit, since the transit center itself is where people are currently congregating. What, is it going to have spaces for people to just be, outside of, talk about, if not police, but should, there'd be like a social worker outpost. There'd be like an outpost for various public community service organizations, because it is so central. There was not as much conversation about the future of, expanded transit, articulated buses. Not that it wasn't talked about, but that wasn't what that conversation was about. It was more about how does the transit center situate itself within the and really more as a growth, something that is already established. How does it grow in that capacity? And no one really brought up
Sorry.
and no one really brought up
Even a DDA lady.
Yeah.
Seen.
The DDA, I've had some interesting conversations with members of the DDA. They're not like the stereotype that I would have had of I need on-street parking right in front of my business, or I'm going under. There is there are a lot of thoughtful people, considering a much broader perspective than what you might have expected if you're just looking at, numbtot memes on Facebook.
It was interesting to see or hear, I think his name is Dylan, the non-motorized, fair. He brought up parking more actually than the DDA, and was of course more interested in taking the parking for other, better uses or multimodal uses. But then the DDA didn't, they didn't flinch at that, so I thought that was pretty great.
One of the things I took from that conversation, great interest in what could be in that building, programming of that space. And I think that's one where we have to be cautious about managing expectations. Because that is directly gonna drive costs. If you imagine that rendering with no building on that platform at all. That's probably about 50% of all the platforms in North America alone. Building is not actually very common. You go to California, they hardly have any buildings at all, because it's California. You get into rainier climates, you start to see more roofs. You get into cold weather climates, then you start to see shelters that are climate controlled. But because it's on a platform, it's already space constrained. Because it's being circled by buses, you kind of don't want to necessarily have more people in there than you need. 9/11, I hate to bring that one up, but really brought a lot of attention to security and transportation planning in terms of maybe not having people loitering if you can avoid it. And so engineering out certain amenities because they just attracted people to hang out, and that created some security concerns for a long time. But I think one of the things, just thinking about the community's interest, that will be something we'll need to keep an eye on is what does that building look like? How much space can we afford, frankly, to provide to anything other than the strict necessity for operational needs? We know we need to at least replace the existing buildings capacity, getting rid of anything there would be unimaginable. So we have to have a customer service kiosk center. We have to provide more bathrooms that, the drivers especially are very, very singularly focused on that one, and they're not wrong, because it affects operations. If they're waiting in line for the loo, buses can't leave on time, so there's an operational issue there. Interior waiting space for a larger number of people, even if they're coming in surges and then dispersing, you need a certain footprint. North American standards, I think, are like 3 meters per person standing, and that's actually a lot. You can get crunched down quite a lot. Beyond that, some of the things we've heard, social worker space, community meeting space, like we'll have to approach those things very cautiously about how much of that can we accommodate in the building. How much of a building is there really? So that was something I took from that in terms of there are a lot of really good ideas. But the budget is going to become an issue at some point, and our operational requirements will be something there as well. We're not closing the door on anything right now. I want to be really clear, and actually this conversation has given me more to think about. And a lot more flexibility in the old building, in addition to the new building that I had thought of before.
So mixed use is out.
Sorry?
Mixed use is not an option. Shared retail housing. Like
So-
security.
So mixed use, like, so having a retail kiosk in the building.
Or like additional floors in the last.
So I don't think it's off, but it introduces a level of complexity and cost into a bus terminal project that at a certain point, the whole thing becomes just kind of unworkably large and complicated. Housing mixing with bus operations. If we start going to 24/7 operations some point in the future, you want to live in an apartment directly above that?
That's the city.
Yeah, no, I mean, it can be done. It is done. Would it work here? Is another question. Years ago, I was approached about whether or not we would play a role in someone's idea for a train platform here in Ypsilanti. And they said we could run a retail platform, and I had to point out to them the number of people getting on and off the train will not be anywhere near sufficient to sustain a business. You need massive amount of foot traffic if you don't have parking for retail. So you got to think a little bit more about those sorts of things. I wouldn't rule it out. I don't think we have. But I think going into multiple stories introduces a whole nother layer of complexity. There are some grant programs for it, and I wouldn't completely write it off. But it definitely creates a more complicated situation.
We're ready to move on to steps. Is that where you're headed? or-
Yes, that's where I'm going. I think we talked a little bit about these, but the environmental review with that historic district, consideration, that's our big step going forward, plus, finalizing those site concepts and starting on initial, schematics. So that was, planned for happening the rest of this year. And then planning for the next round of public engagement in fall 2024. The actual, the round of public engagement now has given us some ideas, might look a little bit different in the fall. Compared to what we did now, but we do plan to have that engagement in the fall. And then there could be additional engagement that we need as part of that environmental review process, depending on how things shake out. And then by, early next or late this year, early next year, try to move into that next phase of taking those designs on the next step. But again, that really depends on the environmental review process and how fast we want to move as we work through that. If we do have to do, look at some we do have an impact on some of these buildings. So, thank you. I know it's been a great discussion. Every time I do one of these, I learn something new and something else to consider. So this has really been wonderful. I appreciate everyone's input. We'd love to have, I do have some flyers if you want to take any. We'd love to have this survey filled out by as many people as possible if we can get the word out. So the ride YPC.org goes through a lot of what I just went through, but then at the end of that, there's a survey to really look at each of the concepts. That email is me. It's pretty much just me monitoring it, so please feel free to email me at that email address or at my at email address at TheRide. Also taking calls, and this is the website that we have that will be for the kind of keep a record of the project as we go along. So that's on our TheRide.org.
Thank you, Gretchen.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We're going to move on to the CEO report. Is that all, thanks?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a couple of things I will try to elaborate on in the report, because there's been a few things that's happened. First, I'd like to ask Jeff Pfeiffer, Manager of Public Affairs and Community Engagement, to give us a little update on the legislative agenda, because there's a lot going on, Lansing.
Sure. Well, quick update. I think some things are different from what the CEO report reflects. On the budget conversation at the state level, both the House and the Senate did pass their respective budgets. Tomorrow, the 17th, we should get the May consensus revenue estimates. Every indication sounds positive, so that'll kind of dictate how much money the budget actually has to play with. We'll head into a consensus committee, and the House and Senate will basically zero out their budgets, and we'll move on from there. I will say the LBO conversation has headed into a much more positive direction than we had last month. Both the Senate and House appropriations did add additional funding to the LBO in both their versions. I think the Senate is slightly more favorable, but we'll see what version they end up coming out with. New development as of yesterday. There's been a proposal that's been discussed that would be, I use the word monumental in long-term funding for transportation. A lot of it has to stem with reallocation of the corporate income tax. Right now, a tremendous amount of those funds go to SOAR funding, which is designed to entice businesses to come to Michigan, basically stimulate economic growth through corporate business attraction. One of the proposals is looking to take the corporate income tax funds and reallocate it in a sense. Some still would go to SOAR funding, but there would be a pretty substantial amount going towards transportation. Within that, there would be an agency set up to kind of dictate how the funds are used. There would, in the early base, a set amount would go to LBO, so that would help, part of the conversation that we're having every year about LVO funding, but some could also go to capital projects. A lot of it would depend on population in whichever MDOT region you are in, so you'd see funding for both urban agencies and larger agencies such as ourselves, and then also rural agencies in Michigan. So more to come on that. I think you'll see my prediction budget passing in the next, I don't know, 3 to 6 weeks here. But everything sounds like it's heading into a good direction, and you know, this new proposal is very exciting.
So I want to pause right there, and just because I think there's a lot of the stuff in the CEO report, but pause right there, because Jeff's touched on a couple of important things, and to sort of see if there are questions or discussion points for him.
LP or what?
Local bus operations, sorry, yeah, I've had to learn a lot of these acronyms, so yes, that's the operating mechanism for transit agencies, the LDO.
We are fortunate, many states provide no operational support to public transit agencies. Michigan is one that does. There's a certain pot of money through their convoluted transportation funding things, and historically, most of that derives from the gas tax, and it was set up, in this case, in 1951. Portion of it trickles down into a operational support fund called Local Bus Operating, LBO. It's a pot of money. Right, recently it's been around 200 million-ish, 196-ish, which then has to get shared proportionately among all the transit agencies in the state. Historically, for us, this has worked out to be about 29 to 30% reimbursement on eligible operating expenses. It's actually very generous. A lot of states don't do anything that nice. So this is an important part of our operating budget. To hear that it is getting a lot of love in Lansing from the legislature, not just in the one-year budget, but also possibly with this more monumental discussion that's really only, I think, for us 48 hours ago, maybe 24, when we became aware of it. That would be a huge improvement and very welcome by the transit agencies across the state.
And just so that I understand, you said gas tax, and as cars are electrifying, what does this mean long-term for local bus operating money?
So I think that was me. So Jeff was talking about reallocation of corporate income tax.
Corporate income tax, I'm sorry, okay.
But I did mention the gas tax, and your question there is astute and spot on. Almost all transportation funding in the US, whether federal or state, originally hitched its wagon to gas taxes. And for decades, that's been a pretty good source of revenue. But as more battery electric cars come on the road, other sorts of things, everyone realizes that its days are numbered. If for no other reason that it's no longer fair. There are people driving Teslas that effectively are using the roads for free. And if nothing else, you have an equity problem now. The state, I believe is that in the
They
budget?
put 5 million towards, is that what you're referencing?
Yeah,
The
the pilot,
pilot towards
is
looking
that
at
the
other
budget or is that?
budget, well, not officially approved, but I think it was in both the House and Senate.
Yeah, so I was trying to figure it, we're in that transitionary
Right.
moment, proposals flying around. They are proposing a $5 million pilot project to study how the state of Michigan would replace gas tax with something else, and right now they're looking at what is sometimes called a VMT tax. You might call it an odometer tax. It's the idea of paying directly out of pocket to use the road, whether you are with a car, not walking or biking or anything, but to drive on the road regardless of your fuel type. So like a toll road. The question then becomes, we're not putting toll booths in everywhere, obviously. So how do you do that? What are the privacy considerations? Are we LoJacking every car to figure out how many roads you drove on, to who your money should go to? Like it's the idea is simple, the execution is incredibly complicated. But if this proposal is approved, Michigan's gonna take a crack at figuring out how to do it. That could become, 10 years from now, a very important discussion.
Any questions on this subject?
All right, then, In terms of the rest of the CEO report, a couple other things, discussions with MDOT pertaining to US 23 and our work with them on Washtenaw Avenue, Pell, planning an environmental linkages study. I want to say it's going very well. I am cautiously optimistic we'll hear some good and important things in the coming weeks. Zero emissions bus propulsion. We didn't expect to hear anything on the Low-No grant, and we haven't, so spot on, right on target. We did submit earmark requests to Peters and Dingle. Just learned today that Dingle selected other projects to take forward in her next round. I want to thank all the staff people who had a hand in that. That was, I think, the longest shot for funding we had in that one. She already gave us $7 million just a couple of years ago. She's got to spread it around. I mean, come on. I think that was probably the longest shot. No harm, no foul there. The big one is still the Low-No grant. We're still waiting. And I heard this afternoon also DDOT Detroit apparently is walked back there for, they put in a proposal. I didn't know that. They've walked it back entirely to hybrids. So that's the only thing they're asking for. And so in terms of who is our competition, well, at least we got the hydrogen thing, something to differentiate us. We will let you know more as we hear it, but again, we didn't expect anything on the Low-No or the sister bus and bus facilities grant until at least July. So don't expect to hear much until then. Local advisory committee, we've been having, I think, some really good conversations with them over the last couple of months about sort of streamlining and focusing their work. And you passed a revised policy a year and a half ago at this point, asking them to come back to you on an annual basis as part of your ownership linkage to represent their part of the residents of the area, the moral ownership, specifically to focus on policy feedback to you. And we're just, I think, really starting to get a little bit more traction with the members of that group. So we're very excited about that. International Bus Rodeo, we're so proud of Kilo. You did a great job. It was very competitive, but I think several of our folks went along with them. Yvette, were you? I think
Yes.
You went there. Do you want to say just a few words about what a bus rodeo is like? And that's I think, a warship in the background here. Is this done on a pier? Wasn't in an active fire zone, but where were you and what was it?
Portland, Oregon. This was at the Port of Portland. So, and that was a great big, long Navy ship or some sort. But it was good. So this was the first international bus rodeo since 2019, since COVID happened. That was put on hold. But it was good, for him to participate. It was his first time winning the rodeo that we had locally, and then by him winning here, he was able to go there and compete amongst other people at different transit agencies and in a bus that's different from our bus. So, to kind of even out the platform, everybody was in, one of their supplied buses, and a great experience. I'm looking forward to, having other operators win in other years, or Kilo to win again, and to participate in that. So, but it's a obstacle course of just cones, and they do a alley dock and left turns, right turns, and if you hit cones, and you lose points. If you go over the time limit, you lose points, and so fun experience. So.
And
I just wanted to say that I had the opportunity to attend the one that was here originally.
Yes, you did.
And I highly recommend next year if you guys have the opportunity to go to attend. It's very exciting, and we not only watch our bus drivers participate, but we also watch the University of Michigan participate, and we get to watch that camaraderie, but also that little bit of tension, like I'm going to be, you're going to be, kind of thing. And so I just wanted to say what a wonderful opportunity that was, and to piggyback on what you were saying. Congratulations to people on your friend don't fall out. Then didn't place anywhere.
It was weird because they scored it, the way that they ranked everything in the results was by alphabetical. So I don't know if it was 1, 2, 3, you know, you had to kind of go through it and figure it out, and so I don't know. It was too many names. It's too many names, but he did a great job. And he
It started to
also,
rain when he was doing
it,
that.
I was just about to say that, thanks, Jeff. It rained in Portland every single day, on and off, and I'm like, this is dreadful, but, when it was Kilo's turn to go, it absolutely. So, you know, yet another obstacle that, so, yeah.
So, and we're very happy to begin, really getting our staff back into those sorts of things. It's great for morale, it's great for engagement, a little competitive spirit. But also just, getting more engaged with the broader industry. Having them go out and meet some of their peers, seeing how some of their peers do things. I have the same aspirations for you guys going to conferences and so I had to put a plug in there. So thank you. And then one last thing, towards the bottom of the last page, there's 53, a mention to something that I rarely have brought up to you. I've been on the board of the Michigan Public Transit Association probably now since 2016. I was president of the board for 2 years. I'm now in my second term as the immediate past president. It's never been busier. And there's with a lot of good stuff going. But it has definitely taken me out of the office a bit more. I was in Cadillac, Michigan earlier, more trips to Lansing. Our executive director of the association has been there for, I think, about 25 years. Is retiring, Clark is retiring, and so we're well into the interviews for his replacement and really excited about that. The idea of renewal and rejuvenation in the association is really nice. And then, as I was mentioning to some of you before the meeting, decades ago, there was a bit of a schism in the local transit industry. And we had one association, and it was the MPTA. A group splintered off and formed the second, smaller association, primarily of rural, but also small urban, I think Port Huron, transit agencies. And that's been kind of, I would say, reducing the effectiveness of the trade association's advocacy to just have two messages coming out of the transit industry in Michigan, mostly directed at Lansing. Worst cases, years ago, we actually tripped over each other and had competing messages, and that's just a great opportunity for a legislator to say, well, I'm not even gonna mess with you, I'm going on to the next people. We're having, I think, very early and tentative, but more fruitful conversations with that other association now than we've had probably since 2000 or before. And I think it's just a timing question. I'm really excited to be a part of those conversations. It took me up to Cadillac, meeting some new people, but it is taking a bit more of my time. So if I'm a little slower in returning their calls, I apologize. I expect to have the executive director thing sort of put to bed really by August. And I'm interested to see how these merger discussions continue. That may take a bit longer. You don't unwind 35 years in 5 weeks. So, but I just wanted to point that out to you because it is something related to advocacy. We are looking forward to bringing you advocacy material at the next board meeting as well as the business plan. So thank you. That completes the CEO report. Happy to answer any questions about anything that's in there or that we said.
And I have a question about something that not in the report. I think I saw very recently, maybe it was at the bridge, a little bit of discussion about regional transit and Mayor Duggan bringing that up. I think it also said what you had said in the past, that there's a timing issue here that they can only do in November. Is there anything possibly happening?
Specifically with the RTA?
Well, with anything having to do with regional transit.
Yeah,
particularly
so
the RTA.
what you may be referring to, and I do look at Bridge, although I didn't catch that one. Warren Evans, executive of Wayne County, surprised many people a couple of weeks ago, I think at a chamber event, I think so.
Yeah, maybe.
By saying, yeah, it could be, I know Duggan said a few things too. He surprised a lot of people in Metro Detroit by sort of springing on the crowd during his comments. Maybe the time has come for Wayne County to go all in on transit taxes, as Oakland County did a year or so ago. You know, one of the biggest problems for SMART has been their funding comes municipality by municipality, and it creates this patchwork Swiss cheesed service area problem. Novi for decades has not been, or no, Livonia, excuse me, doesn't want to pay the tax. So the smart bus has to go through closed door, won't pick up or drop off. It's absurd. And so the idea that Wayne County might follow Oakland County into and Macomb County, frankly, and to be the whole county pays the tax would be a huge improvement for Metro Detroit Transit, just seismic. It's something they've wanted to do for decades and have never been able to accomplish. It has the perverse alternative effect of undermining the RTA itself, however, because every time a county levies its own tax, it kind of takes the tax room away from the RTA or the potential for an RTA tax. So it's good, but it has a flip side to it. The RTA, now the Warren Evans idea could happen anytime in terms of when they go to the ballot. And it's Jeff and I were talking, we can't quite tell if he was just spitballing, if it was a speculative balloon he was floating in front of a group of people, just talking off the cuff, or if he's serious. Like, we have no insight into that at all. So it could have been anything in that universe. The RTA can only go in November and in even numbered years by legislation. So there is no chance, I think, this year. They would have needed to have been well on their way in January, and they don't have anything ready to go. And I'm not aware of any campaign apparatus of any sort. So I don't think they're going this year. I actually asked that question of them back in December, and they're so the next one would be obviously 2026 would be the next time, and a lot can change. It's really a political question, so I wouldn't write them off, but it's definitely kind of hard to see them getting past the main political block for them, which is Macomb County. They need at least one vote from every county they represent. Macomb has consistently said, we're not interested in more taxes. So that's the roadblock to the RTA. Beyond that, the idea of regional transit, independent of the RTA, is getting a lot more chatter, particularly from the state. Some of the stuff that Jeff was alluding to that we're seeing very clearly uses the word regional in it. We're seeing that more commonly from Lansing regarding transit. It's very unclear what it means. They're talking about the whole state. So is that like the Traverse Bay area? Like, what are you talking about here? And generally it is like something that has to cover very rural areas, small urbans, southeast Michigan. And so the word regional is kind of a Rorschach test, depending on, can you see what you want to see in it? But it generally means covering multiple municipalities or multiple counties, perhaps. And in that regard, there are certainly projects, we're keeping an eye on that, because there are projects like our second ring of park and ride lots that could fit that bill. Even the idea of bus rapid transit between Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti could fit that bill. We don't consider it regional, but the state might. I think of Ypsi and Ann Arbor kind of like in the same yard. I don't necessarily think of that as regional per se, but some others might. So we're tracking that sort of stuff very carefully. So regionalism, getting a lot of talk, possibly some more money, not through the RTA as of yet. And the whole Wayne County thing, we're not quite sure what to make of that announcement. I hope that was, I found your answer in there somewhere.
Well, no, you gave a much better answer than the question.
Are there any other questions or comments for the CEO on this report? All right, then, inspection item recap.
Okay, I have two. First off, we're going to call up our friends at University of Michigan and see if we can have some, a presentation or some other information about their campus plan, 2050. And, we're gonna add to the governance committee agenda to look at 327 regarding the wording of creating approval. Seems a little, doesn't roll off the tongue. So we'll see if the governance committee wants to, address that. Other than that, and a lot of warnings about the paperwork ahead of you and the business plan and the budget, I don't have any other action items that I've recorded.
Very good. And so that brings us up to topics for the next meeting, in addition to the recap and the advocacy agenda, the business plan, environmental sustainability to 1. We will be going over the governance process policies that everyone completed yesterday. We had to move the falls on buses to June. And then the quarterly two service report is also going to happen. Just a reminder, it's not on your sheet that we're back down to the downtown library ADL in Ann Arbor at 6:30 p.m. for our next meeting on June 20th. And that brings us to 9:23 public comment. Is there anyone in the gallery? Deb, do we have anyone online before we take the gallery? We don't show anyone. Okay. So if anyone has public comment here, you're more than welcome to approach the podium. We have next 3 minutes.
Good evening, a very long meeting, so I'll make this brief as I possibly can. Robert Fausti, Vice Chair for the CAC and a longtime transit activist. So I kind of wanted to save my comments for the last bit of the meeting. One of the things that I think is one of the biggest accomplishments here was the Washington Express route. Very excited, didn't ride the first one, but I got to ride the last one in service. With a couple of my transit activists from Detroit, and big credits to the amazing staff for actually getting that up and rolling. It's gonna be a huge hit. I have voiced some concerns regarding 2 stops that I think should be on the route, but I've been in conversation with the planning team. We really need to consider maybe having some on Parkway for sure, because there's a lot of ridership that gets on that area, especially with the Barnes and Noble there. College students will find that very easy and accessible to have that frequency there. But other than that, planning department, very great job on the Washington route. Very excited. Glad that you guys are having the same fare, like most routes in different cities, or you have like a $2 or $2.50 fare. So I'm glad that's not fluctuating at all. Couple things I want to bring out, and I know this is very not prominent here at the ride, but having a community input meeting. I know you guys very much advertise to have public members come to the board meetings and speak, or LAC meetings. Definitely take up a conversation of having like a community-based meeting for all residents to come in, maybe for 30 minutes every month, or even an hour, 2 hours. DDOT does something where they have a community input meeting for an hour and a half. And SMART just introduced something called the sounding board, which goes for about 30 minutes. I think it should be more than that, but that's not my call. But the ride with its public engagement is very much outstanding, and having something to where if there is a concern and people don't know where to go, or having that opportunity to have space to speak at a meeting with staff, it definitely mean a lot, especially for something that pertains either to planning or marketing or even to the CEO. But those are just my 2 cents. And I think a shout out to Dino over here for the budget. And we just got a brief draft on it, but I'm very excited to see the next budget coming up in October. Anything particular to the budget, Dina, I would love to give you your feedback before the public does. If you have a draft that will be ready to be sent out to the public, please feel free to share it to me via email. I would love to give you some feedback before it gets sent out. And even for the YTC, I would love to give some more feedback via email. So pretty sure someone has my thread here at some point, but anyone, I would love to give you guys feedback through this process. I do got some questions too regarding kind of the planning with the new YTC. I know we beat that dead horse enough tonight, but great dialogue. It's just there's a lot of questions, especially liability and the property owners regarding, you know, the surrounding areas with the transit center. It's gonna be a concern. So you might have some property owners that might say, hey, you don't want that, and that's gonna be a concern. So, you know, I can speak for that, but even the LAC, I've heard there's been some people that have passed away recently. And the last one I've been to was, I think, February or March of this year. And you know, my condolences go out to their family, but I think the LAC is very productive and anything that we can do with the Citizens Advisory Committee to help with that, maybe have a liaison on our behalf, you know, we would love to help you guys in that process, but you know, the LAC I know has been struggling and I know we should have definite conversations about membership. But maybe expanding it out for people that are not in the service area, you know, they're very passionate about transit, maybe amending the bylaws, something to really consider. But again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Alright, then that concludes our public comment for this evening. Would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn? And seconded by Susan, all those in favor? Opposed? Good night, everybody.
Did you mention that you guys had road stick as well?
They are great.
Yeah.
Trying to not get too long.
Oh, yes.
I like it.
Yeah. I know the one.
Yeah.
Probably the most hardest problem.
We're not-
Yeah, there's a lot of logistics.
We're not.
Just.
We didn't.
And.
I think.
Yeah. Whatever we find, talk back.
Well, we got.
That's a wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All the neighboring businesses down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
In person, I don't like using the floor. Sorry, I have the unions after that, with all the stops, all the people that pull that. It's just, you know, I'll get out. Yeah, well, that's not too bad,
They're.
Is that what you guys are following? Because
Yeah, sure. Yeah. They want to- Yeah, so. Yeah, these, you know, real estate.
Yeah, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And especially with Barton over the, you know, our generation. And that's like a space that. Off campus. Like, that's like. It's the only part of the where I go to. Besides my part. Because I have so much. You got. Things together, also it's kind of. The other aspects of But that's my two cents. A lot of stuff like at least the. Vice chair. Working with DDOT at an airport, they just.
Kathleen, did you get the card back?
All that. So two major conferences.
Yeah, how can I help?
was eventually you're so First full day of the conference. Yeah, I know. A lot of things. We were, a lot of moving parts. And I was, I mean, probably maybe I put it fine. And I would either. I've been have service and I just. That's where I get the vibe. I see. That's a big service.
Oh, yeah, here, yeah.
I don't like much if I know it's.
Yeah.
I'm gonna set it down.
I don't have as much, grace as I used to.
Yeah, I'm definitely.
Oh, no, I just didn't know where it was. Ah.
Really robust. Really what I'm.
Yeah, we need that input, so I'm glad, you know, glad you.
It's always good to see you, Deborah.
Yes. I'm sorry, I forgot. It's just saying. I was gonna put probably cookies if you want.
I'll take one. Thank you. Not bad.